Angelina Fontaine was just another face moving through the soft neon haze of Newport Richey. 24 years old, a dancer, a performer, 7 months pregnant, and still showing up to work with a smile no one quite trusted as real. She didn't advertise her pregnancy. She wore looser tops, curled into shadows near the edge of the stage. Her movements had slowed in recent weeks. Less spectacle, more mystery. But she still held a presence that made people watch without knowing why. She kept her world small, close, roommate, co-workers, one ex who dropped in sometimes to ask about the baby. There were rumors she planned to keep it. Others said she'd already found an adoptive couple. No one knew for sure because Angelina didn't tell stories. She just deflected them. But in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, something shifted. She stopped staying out late after her shifts. She canceled plans last minute. One friend said she'd started wearing a chain around her ankle, with a small black stone dangling from it. Another remembered her scribbling in a tattered red journal between dances, writing furiously, tearing out pages, folding them into perfect squares, and sliding them into her bag. That journal would later be found half empty under a loose floorboard in her closet. The remaining entries were fragmented, skittish, almost dreamlike. One page read, "They said no mirrors, only reflection through fire." Another, "I heard them singing in a circle, but there was no music, just breath." And this, "The moon has eyes. Tonight I meet them." March the 7th, 2016. A Monday, her roommate said she came home after her shift, dropped her heels at the door, sat on the edge of the bathtub for nearly 30 minutes without turning the water on. She didn't speak much, just mentioned she had found a place out by Moon Lake where she could get some clarity. "It's a retreat," she said, "for women who want to shed their guilt before giving birth." Her roommate laughed. "You? Guilty of what?" Angelina didn't answer. That was the last conversation they had. Just after noon, she left the apartment. No suitcase, just a small backpack and a manila folder she held close to her chest. Witnesses on the block later told police they saw her get into a dark-colored van with tinted windows. The plates were smudged with what one neighbor described as paint or mud or maybe both. 2 people sat in the front seats. Their faces were obscured. That was the last confirmed sighting of Angelina Fontaine alive. March 9th, 2 days later, a missing persons report was filed. What followed was everything the city had seen before: door knocks, phone calls, old photos tacked to bulletin boards. Detectives checked the usual places. Mirage, the other club she had worked in before, her former boyfriends, her estranged parents out in Manatee County. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. One of the dancers at Mirage gave them a clue. She'd seen Angelina talking to a woman weeks prior. Tall, white dreadlocks, long robe or coat, she wasn't sure. They met in the back alley, not the bar. Angelina handed her something folded. The woman nodded, said nothing, and left. It was thin, inconclusive, but enough to open a different line of inquiry. Then came the image, a grainy surveillance capture from a credit union ATM off Route 52, dated March 7th. Timestamp 5:32 p.m. The same day she vanished. The quality was poor, but the face was hers, bruised under one eye, standing slightly off balance. Behind her, partially visible, were 2 individuals wearing long off-white robes. No logos, no shoes. One of them held something close to her back, either a guiding hand or something more threatening. Her expression said it all. She looked frightened. There was no withdrawal, no transaction. She had inserted the card but canceled before completing the process. The account would later show no activity after that date. No purchases, no messages, no location pings. From that moment on, the investigation shifted. It was no longer a case of someone running off, scared of motherhood or past mistakes. Something else had taken hold. In the early days, police still leaned on familiar ground. Arguments with exes, unreported medical conditions, mental health episodes, but every stone they turned over led to silence. And then came the manila folder. Her roommate, confused by the police search, mentioned it weeks after the fact. She hadn't thought it was relevant, but when officers returned, they found something wedged behind a radiator, a charred corner of what used to be a paper file. warped from heat, barely legible. Only two things remained readable: a photocopy of her ID and a single typed paragraph on what looked like thick, textured paper. It read, "To suffer is to purify. To purge is to climb. Let the mind burn. Let the breath stop. The vessel must be clean before the gift can be passed through." There was no signature. One detective said it read more like scripture than application. Another called it a creed. Either way, it raised a single terrifying question. What exactly had Angelina applied for? Tick around, because what happens by the end will leave you stunned and questioning how such a thing was ever allowed to happen in modern America. It wasn't a break in the case, it was a rupture. A slow, splitting crack that widened until something too awful to name began leaking through. March 23rd, 16 days after Angelina's disappearance, a land surveyor reported an odor. "Something wrong," he said. "Not dead animal, not mold. This was different. Chemical but sweet, spoiled but dry." The smell had clung to his clothes even after he left the woods. Deputies traced it to a private lot bordering the northern edge of Moon Lake. No address, no mailbox. Just rusted fencing and a crooked wooden sign marked with a half circle etched backward. The property had no name, no known owner, just coordinates and trees, thick, pressing trees, and a single gravel path that led to a forgotten clearing. There they found it, a cabin, if you could call it that. Weather warped, no electricity, no phone lines, but the lock on the door was new. It took less than an hour to get the warrant. Inside, time buckled. The walls were lined with parchment. Real parchment, not paper. Aged, yellowed skin covered in calligraphy. None of it in English. Some of it not in any recognizable language at all. There were no light fixtures, just shallow bowls arranged in a tight circular formation around a central altar, if that's what it was. At the center, bones, dozens of them, sorted, bleached, bound together with strands of dark hair and what looked like sinew. The altar rose 3 feet off the ground. It wasn't haphazard. It was precise, artful, methodical in a way that suggested doctrine, not impulse. Vertebrae had been stacked vertically to form pillars. A pelvis formed the base. A skull, adult female, crowned the top, the jaw still wired shut, teeth filed into thin, uneven points. But that wasn't the worst of it. Mounted behind the altar, carved directly into the cabin's back wall, was a familiar phrase. "The moon has eyes." Same words from Angelina's journal, same phrasing, same shape. Only this time, burned into wood by flame. Investigators stepped outside. They said the air felt heavier there, as if the forest itself was pressing closer, listening, watching. One officer vomited behind a tree. Another refused to go back in, but the evidence demanded it. Behind a false panel in the floor, they found a hollowed space lined with stone, too refined to be accidental. Inside, a series of items laid out with disturbing symmetry. A photograph of Angelina Fontaine, printed in black and white. Her eyes were crossed out in thick ink. A blood-stained bundle of fabric, later confirmed to be maternity underwear. A second skull, smaller, still forming. Fused, unmistakably fetal. The news didn't break for 3 more days. The sheriff's department claimed it was due to the sensitive nature of the discovery, but those on the ground said different. One medic quit that night. Another transferred counties the following week. Because what they'd seen wasn't a missing person scene, and it wasn't a simple homicide. It was something else entirely, a ritual, a room designed not for comfort or habitation, but for worship, twisted worship, the kind passed down in secrecy, rehearsed, repeated. And that begged a more horrifying question than anyone wanted to ask. If this was a shrine, who or what was it built to honor? The property wasn't listed under anyone's name. No deed, no lease. But neighbors, what few there were, remembered the traffic. Vans, mostly white, windows blacked out, coming and going at strange hours. No one stepped outside. No one ever waved. One man who'd lived off Moon Lake Road for over 40 years said it best. They didn't act lost. They acted rehearsed. The sign out front said Moon Lake Retreat. Painted with lilac swirls, it promised healing, awakening, and something called realm work. But the place itself looked like a collection of condemned cabins, overgrown paths, no plumbing, rotted decks. One outhouse had a mirror nailed to it with the words, "Face the Before," scratched across the glass. Inside the main building, deputies found 9 people. None of them ran. None of them denied who they were. They called themselves disciples. Disciples of what? That answer came slower, and it came with one name, spoken with a kind of reverence that unnerved even seasoned detectives. Ezra Kane. Ezra wasn't born Ezra Kane. His real name was Martin Eli Porter, born in Idaho, raised strict Pentecostal, straight-A student, attended seminary in Texas. Then something shifted. Records show he dropped out during his second year after what one professor later described as a troubling obsession with extra-biblical texts. He resurfaced years later under the new name. No social security, no license, but plenty of followers. The disciples at Moon Lake claimed he taught them to see behind the veil, to prepare the cradle, to welcome the moon's breath. Ezra Kane believed in something he called moon children, not metaphors, not symbols, actual unborn souls, human vessels destined to bridge 2 realities, one mortal, one described only in fragments. Ezra preached that the moon didn't shine, it reflected, but not light. Memory, an ancient collective memory that humans had buried under reason, and that only through ritual could that memory be restored. Birthed. To do that, the child had to be willing. The vessel had to be cleansed. And that's where Angelina came in. Searches of the compound unearthed more than just ideology. They found syringes, burned spoons, traces of ketamine, traces of DMT, scorch marks in the grass behind the cabins, one still smoldering beneath a blackened iron pot filled with bone fragments and a paste-like substance that later tested positive for fetal protein. Behind the largest cabin, they found a grave. No marker, no cross, just a circle of red stones placed carefully at each corner. Inside, partial remains. Adult female. The jaw and ribs bore tool marks. Clean, deliberate incisions. Not hacking, not frenzied. Something closer to surgery. Autopsy confirmed what many already feared. The remains belonged to Angelina Fontaine. But it wasn't just her. Scans of the fragments showed smaller bone growth, developing cartilage, fetal vertebrae. There were no signs of panic, no broken fingernails, no scratch wounds. Toxicology came back with one main chemical, ketamine. The report didn't use dramatic language. It didn't need to. It said one thing clearly: Angelina had been sedated. Fully, she never fought. The state pathologist called it vivisection, the kind that requires planning, equipment, time, intent. This wasn't rage, this was ritual, and it was recorded. Inside a back room, detectives found a sealed chest containing 47 leather-bound notebooks, each page written in what looked like a private language, part glyph, part phonetic English, drawings, instructions, diagrams of the female body overlaid with crescent shapes and strange measurements annotated in red ink. One passage stood out more than the others, not for its handwriting, but for its clarity. To devour the vessel is to unlock the moon's truth. The child is the key. The mother is the gate. Through her blood, the path clears. Through the scream, we awaken. Elsewhere in the notebooks, investigators found what resembled schedules, timetables of rituals, names of women. Some had check marks beside them. Others had a date and the word vessel empty. None of the other women had been reported missing. But what disturbed authorities most wasn't just the ideology, it was the tone. There was no panic in these pages, no madness, no desperation, only instruction, detailed, patient, certain. This was a belief system, one passed down or built up over time, reinforced daily, repeated with calm purpose, and it was growing. Because Ezra Kane wasn't arrested during the raid. He wasn't found with the 9 disciples. He wasn't even in the county. Ezra had vanished weeks earlier, and he'd taken someone with him, Another woman, also pregnant. If what you've heard so far feels beyond comprehension, you're not alone. Cases like this don't justify logic. They drag it into the dirt. They leave families broken, investigators stunned, and entire communities wondering how something so methodical, so rehearsed, could have stayed hidden in plain sight. If this story has you unsettled, if your gut is twisting the same way ours did when we uncovered the next chapters, let us know. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. What would you have done if this were your town, your sister, your child? And if you're drawn to true accounts that challenge what we think we know about people, belief, and human darkness, this is where we tell them. Real stories, unfiltered, every single week. So take a second, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and stay with us. Because what comes next is worse, much worse. When the contents of the Moon Lake compound finally made headlines, it wasn't the grotesque details that haunted the public. It was the question, was Angelina Fontaine truly the only one? Detectives, now combing through years of unsolved cases, began noticing threads that had been missed. Small names, background disappearances, women on the fringes of society, young, mostly alone, some with troubled histories. 3 names surfaced within days. Each had worked in adult clubs across Tampa Bay. Each had vanished without a ripple, their cases filed and forgotten. One name stood out, Brielle Mendoza, last seen in 2014. She told a friend she was detoxing in the woods for clarity. No one had heard from her again. Another, Callan Hart, had left behind only a voicemail. "I'm not sick, I just need to meet someone. It's important." Her body was never found. Guest logs from Moon Lake revealed signatures, scribbled, incomplete. But there they were, 3 of them. The same driver's initials logged their arrival. A matching van description surfaced in each case. For authorities, this was no longer a theory, it was a pattern, one they'd overlooked for years. But then, someone spoke. Her name was Talia Greaves, 23, a survivor. She had never filed a report, had never told her family. But after watching the news coverage, she came forward with a voice that trembled and cracked through every word. She said she'd met Ezra Kane at a meditation class. He was soft-spoken, intelligent, said things no one else said, told her she had a deep aura, that her pregnancy wasn't a burden, but a divine event, a calling. He invited her to Moon Lake, called it a sanctuary. She said yes. Talia lasted 3 nights. "They made us wear these white gowns," she said. "No phones, no clocks. They burned sage constantly, said it purified the air for the moon to enter. At first it felt harmless, even healing. Then they told me my baby had a purpose beyond Earth, that he was a gate, that I'd be released after his role was fulfilled." Her voice cracked. "I thought it was metaphorical until they tried to inject me." Talia escaped barefoot, with nothing but a bruised rib and a crescent moon carved into her wrist. She never told anyone, not until now. Her testimony reopened everything. Warrants were issued. 2 more cabins were searched. One was empty. Another had a cemented basement floor, freshly poured. In April 2016, arrests began. 6 women, 3 men. Every one of them wore a ring engraved with a lunar symbol. Their mugshots were unsettling, calm, composed, smiling. And then there was Ezra Kane. He did not run. He did not deny knowing the victims. He did not weep, nor tremble, nor speak out of turn. In the courtroom, he referred to himself not as Mr. Kane, but as Shepherd. He claimed no wrongdoing, said every woman who came to Moon Lake did so by choice, that their bodies were vessels, that he'd fulfilled a spiritual duty, nothing more, nothing less. The courtroom recoiled. Prosecutors built their case on the physical evidence: bones, blood, DNA, ritual logs, injection kits. But Ezra's attorneys leaned into the First Amendment. They argued religious protection. They painted the Moon Lake Doctrine as a misunderstood belief system, no different than fringe theology practiced for centuries. It didn't work. When the journals were read aloud, even the most seasoned jurors averted their eyes. One entry read, "To sever the spine is to silence doubt. The womb is a gateway. The gateway must close." It was no longer about spiritual freedom. It was a blueprint for slaughter. The defense collapsed. And as the verdict loomed, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a cult. This was a quiet war against the sacred. And Angelina Fontaine had not been its only casualty. She had simply been the one they could not erase. They called it spiritual. They called it healing. But what happened in that cabin was neither. Angelina Fontaine walked into the woods searching for peace, maybe even clarity. Instead, she found a doctrine built on delusion, a leader who weaponized belief, and followers who stopped asking questions the moment the answers got dark. 9 arrests, 3 confirmed victims. And still, investigators believe there may be more. Cases left unsolved, lives gone quiet, names that may never resurface, buried under years of silence and shame. Ezra Kane remains behind bars, convicted but unrepentant. To this day, he has never spoken the name Angelina Fontaine, not once. And so her memory belongs to us, to those who remember her as more than a headline, more than a cautionary tale. She was a daughter, a friend, a mother-to-be, and her story reminds us of something we forget too easily, that evil doesn't always arrive with a mask or a weapon. Sometimes it wears a smile, speaks softly, promises healing. Sometimes it hides behind scriptures and symbols, rituals and robes. What drives people to follow these paths? To obey, to sacrifice, to watch and stay silent? Is it fear, desperation, or is it something deeper, something older, rooted in our longing for purpose, for meaning, for transcendence? We may never have all the answers, but what we do have is a duty to remember, to speak the names, to ask the questions, to dig deeper than headlines and police reports. If this case stunned you, if you felt the same chill we did walking through the timeline, let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts, your theories, your experiences. Why do people follow the unthinkable? And if you want more stories like this, raw, true, and buried in the folds of reality, tap that subscribe button. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to explore the psychology behind cult devotion, how good people fall under dangerous influence, click the video right here. It's one you won't forget. This has been another real story from the darkest corners of truth. Stay aware, stay curious, and above all, stay human. We'll see you next time.